What's up, everyone? It's Penuel, the Black Pen. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank each and every one of you who went and watched the debate between Rutendo Matinyarare from Zimbabwe and Ike Khumalo from South Africa. I decided to make this video because so many people had asked me to share my views, because in essence, all I was doing was mediating a debate and a discussion between these two gentlemen. I've written some notes, and I hope you will allow me. I probably will go back and forth. I'm going to try and speak a little bit slower so I get all my points out, and to also make it easier for the editing team. And I want to cover 10 points that, number one, I took out from the debate and discussion, and that I think is just important for all of you guys to consider and share some of my thoughts on the matter at hand, because it's quite a sensitive and thorny matter for so many people. The points that I've written here, 1 to 10, the first one being the rationale behind the debate. Number 2 is just basic history. I think some of the guys in the debate covered quite a bit of it, and you're always free to go and research for yourself. Number 3, a touch on business and economics. Number 4, laws and immigration. Number 5, why do illegal foreigners commit crimes? Number 6, why foreigners will not go home even once things get better in their home countries. Number 7 covers the elephant in the room and some accountability. Number 8 asks, who are the real decision makers in South Africa? Which leads on to number 9, my point that South Africa does not belong to South Africans. And then number 10, my personal stance and some closing remarks. So to explain the rationale behind the debate, for those of you who had not seen, Ike Khumalo and Rutendo Matinyarare had gone at each other on Facebook and on Twitter. Rutendo released a video. Ike Khumalo had written on Twitter stating that he will not debate the matter of foreigners with foreigners, which luckily for all of us, he actually ended up agreeing to do, and he sat with Rutendo Matinyarare. Ike representing South Africa, Rutendo representing Zimbabwe. I want to raise a few things. First and foremost, a lot of people in the comments mentioned that I gave Rutendo too much time, and Ike I did not give enough time to. I'd like to think I gave both gents a chance to state their piece. And from my side, I think it was Ike who maybe didn't say as much as Rutendo did. I think Rutendo had come forward looking to discuss the history. He is a person who is passionate about the history, especially African history, and it prepped to come and discuss this. And I think it was up to Ike to stop him. As I said, I was just meant to be a mediator more than anything. However, your considerations have been noted. And when I get to sit with the guys again, I will try and time them better. And it's going to be a learning for me as well to make sure that each person gets enough time to speak and say their bit. I cut them off where I need to cut them off, which I try to do towards the end of the debate and the discussion. And I also try to make sure that every time Rutendo was interrupting Ike, I needed to get Ike's consent before allowing Rutendo to continue, and vice versa. But I'm teachable, I'm learning, and as we move forward, and if I get to host more debates and discussions, especially around topics such as these, I will consider that, and I will probably have some type of a timer, and I will prep the guest in advance to tell them, look, I will interrupt at some point to make sure that there is some fair representation. I want to highlight a point that I mentioned at the beginning of the debate and the discussion. It's to define for many people this issue of foreigners in South Africa. So there's something called legal foreigners, and there's something called illegal foreigners. Legal foreigners are the people that are here that have got study permits to come and study, whether it is basic education and mostly tertiary education. There are people with work permits. People who come here because they're coming to work for a company that has hired them, etc. There are people that come here on a tourist visa. They're coming here to visit us for 30 days for a certain period. There are people here with business permits. A lot of people do not distinguish between the two, and they generally tend to be frustrated regardless of whether the person is legal or illegal. The bigger issue we have in South Africa is the illegal foreigner situation, because it speaks to our government, it speaks to our immigration laws, it speaks to the people that work at immigration and other such matters. According to Stats South Africa, we have 4 million people in South Africa that are deemed foreigners. And how they define foreigners is people that were not born in South Africa. Now, that becomes a debate, and it's something that we would have to do a deep dive on. Because what if this person was a South African or born of South African parents, but was born somewhere else? Does this make them a foreigner, or do they by default become a South African citizen? But the differentiator they make, or the definition that they use, is if you are born out of South Africa and you're living in South Africa, you become a foreigner by default. And there are 4 million of those. There have been rumors of between 6 million to 10 million foreigners in South Africa. This includes both legal and illegal, between 6 million and 10 million. Herman Mashaba, who is now under Action SA, but used to be under DA, the Democratic Alliance, was mayor of Johannesburg at some point, and he uttered that there are 15 million illegal foreigners in South Africa. 15 million. And to this day, a lot of people still ride with that number of 15 million. Herman Mashaba has gone on to go and apologize and state that it made a mistake. There are actually 15 million undocumented people in South Africa. By undocumented, it means the person doesn't have an ID, doesn't have a passport, doesn't have papers. This includes South Africans, and it is not just foreigners. So if you've got cousins, if you've got aunts, uncles, if you've got siblings that do not have a birth certificate, that do not have an ID, that means they fall under this 15 million undocumented people. But of course, this includes a lot of foreigners as well, which Stats SA says there are 4 million foreigners. Some of the articles have them at 6 to 10 million. I just wanted to give that context. But that was the rationale behind the debate and the discussion. And more importantly, one of the things I've really believed in is saying that today we have social media. We've got YouTube, we've got TikTok, we've got Facebook, we've got Instagram, we've got LinkedIn, we've got Rumble. We've got all these alternative media platforms. And it's up to us to champion some of the discussions and debates that are important to us. If mainstream media and the news outlets are not doing these things for us, if your political leaders, if your religious leaders, if your business leaders, if your traditional leaders are not having these conversations and discussions on your behalf and are not representing you the way you want, we need to use our cell phones. We need to use video cameras. We need to use the internet. And we need to use these platforms to have these conversations. As I record this on the 23rd of July 2023, we have got over 200,000 viewers of that debate between Ike and Rutendo, and over 4,000 comments of people thanking us for this very, very important conversation, which is not just about South Africa, it's not just about SADC, and it's not even just about Africa, but it's a very important conversation around immigration, legal, illegal, foreigners, immigrants, the crimes, the issues, the leadership, etc. Number 2, a basic history. I'm going to read a bit, so please allow me. Borders were set by colonizers, but we had natural borders before. Land belonged to the conqueror of that piece of land. A place like KwaZulu, which now falls under the province of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, there were borders there. Even within your own home, your fence becomes a border. Even within certain areas, people know that this is where this town starts and this is where another town ends, without necessarily a fence or a border or you needing a passport or a visa. We have had natural borders before, mountains, rivers. Sometimes there will be some type of demarcation, rocks that are put there. And these pieces of land were controlled by the conquerors, whether it is a king, whether it is something like the Vatican where the Pope gets to lead, or whether it's a president, or whether it's some other type of leader in that area. But with the colonial systems, the borders that were set by the colonizers, we ended up agreeing to all of them. This includes all the African nations. That is why today all Africans have IDs, they have passports, they support a flag and national anthem, and you see it especially when they're supporting their sports teams. We are all forced to conform to African laws as they have been inherited by colonizers. A lot of the laws we have today have not been drafted by African leaders and were not drafted to represent the indigenous African people. They are laws that were set, the French, the British, the Portuguese, some Italians, some Belgians, in other places across Africa. And today a lot of us, through our elected black leaders, still abide by these inherited colonial laws which enforce a lot of these borders. There has been no African leader that has scrapped borders. No leader has scrapped national IDs and passports. No leaders have created real platforms to scrap segregated nations. I stand to be corrected, and you can be free in the comments to share, but I do not remember platforms where African leaders say we want to remove the borders And we're inviting other leaders, we're inviting business leaders, traditional, religious leaders to come through and have conversations about how do we remove these borders? And if we're not removing them, how do we shift them to serve? Let's say, for example, SADC wants to be one nation, or Eastern Africa wants to be one nation, or West Africa wants to be one nation, and they remove the borders between these countries to say we are championing for the borders to be removed. May he rest in peace, the leader of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi, and others tried to lead the African Union with one currency and one identifier. He was unfortunately assassinated and killed, of course, by the Americans under Barack Obama. And no African leader to this day has retaliated or has fundamentally continued to do the work that Muammar Gaddafi and the leadership of the African Union at that time was pushing. Your favorite, Jacob Zuma, has not pushed for this work. Paul Kagame in Rwanda is not pushing for this work. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, who was the leader of the AU at some point, has not pushed for this work. Julius Malema is not pushing for this work. Robert Mugabe even was not pushing for this work. And you have to ask yourself today, is there an African leader that is trying to push for true African union to remove the borders? And if they're not removing the borders, to ensure that trade and movement around Africa or around certain parts of Africa has become as seamless as a lot of them claim that they stand for, and some Africans claim that they want. Number 3, business and economics. A lot of people don't know that foreigners in this country of South Africa need to abide by certain laws before they get a business permit. And the law states, and you can go and research it, that any foreigner that wants to do business in South Africa needs to invest a minimum of 5 million rand into an existing business, or they must show a business plan where they are coming to inject 5 million rand as a minimum into business here. This should raise a huge red flag and make you ask questions, especially about spaza shop owners. Have all of these people that are there invested each 5 million rand at a bare minimum to get a business and trading license? And can this be tracked? The South African Police Services, SAPS, a lot of our government officials, a lot of people at Home Affairs see some of these businesses, and yet they turn a blind eye to them. This includes Ethiopians, Pakistanis, Somalians, Bangladeshis. Then, of course, sometimes you find Nigerians who will sell hair products, weaves, wigs. Some of them sell phone parts. Some sell car parts and have workshops. Many foreigners own churches. And what is the regulation around that? How does a foreigner get to own and run a church, a non-profit organization in South Africa? And unfortunately, there have been rumors and arguments that some of these churches act as money laundering institutions for money that is traded through drugs, through human trafficking, and other illicit affairs in South Africa and in other parts of the world. We have Mozambicans in South Africa. We have Sothos, of course, from Lesotho, who labor in South Africa. Do they have the requisite permits? Again, we're speaking business and economics. I want to touch on this. South Africans mainly have got a tribalism issue. Tribalism is, we have tribes in this country which are split. Again, colonialism, but also before colonialism, it was an identifier. We have Zulus being the biggest tribe, even though the word tribe for some people is derogatory. We have Zulus, we have Xhosas, we have Sothos, we have Swatis, we have Pedis, and many others in this country. A large majority of South Africans discriminates on who they feel is part of their tribe and who isn't. The Ngunis, of course, being the most, and some of the Sotho, Pedi, Tswana people coming up second. Sotho people from Lesotho, the Tswana people from Botswana, Namibians, Swatis from Eswatini. A lot of these people look like ordinary South Africans, and they get by. And a lot of South Africans don't have issues with them. And yet, some Zimbabweans look different. Some Nigerians and Ghanaians and Congolese people look physically different, and they sound different. Mozambicans, some of them look like the average South African, but of course they speak Portuguese and their own local languages as well. But this also explains the deep tribalism that many South Africans have with people from Limpopo, the Tsonga and the Venda people, because some of them look different and some of them sound different with the languages that they use. And you've got a situation of prejudice based on aesthetics and sound. This leads, of course, and this speaks to the business and economics of the people that we discriminate against in this country. There was an issue of Phala where the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, was found with a lot of foreign currency at a game farm. And sadly, to this day, we have not seen justice being enacted. We have not seen a thorough investigation. And the acting public protector, who's probably going to be the public protector, has seen to rid Cyril of any accountability there and said she's found him of no wrongdoing. We saw a similar thing with Raymond Zondo, who was the acting Chief Justice at the time, and after the Zondo Commission ended up being given the title of Chief Justice under President Cyril Ramaphosa. One of the rumors that came out under the Phala issue was that a lot of the workers on the farm were Namibian citizens. And to this day, no one has really researched why there were Namibian workers on a farm in South Africa, if these people have work permits, if they are even here legally, and why Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa, would hire foreigners for something that is not a scarce skill when there are so many South Africans that he could hire as well. And this is something that we have an issue with across our economy and across business, where a lot of the people that are coming into this country, arguably called legal foreigners, are not coming here with scarce skills. There are South Africans that have the skills, and yet these people get jobs over our citizens. I didn't touch on this in the interview, in the debate rather, in the discussion, and I did ask for it to be isolated and ring-fenced to a further discussion because it is deeper, it is slightly more complex, and I will explain why I wanted it to be ring-fenced. We've got a lot of non-African foreigners in this country. I mentioned Pakistanis, Bangladeshis. Of course, there's Chinese, there's Indian. We've got Lebanese people. We've got Russians. We've got Germans. Apparently, a lot of them are in Mpumalanga. We've got Greeks and Portuguese. A lot of them have these corner cafes that sell your favorite deep-fried chips and fish. Some of these people live in places like Bedford View, very wealthy, drive fancy cars, send their kids to very expensive schools. Some of the rumors, some of the things we've seen is some of these guys are drug lords. Some of them run strip clubs and peddle drugs and do other heinous crimes in this country. Unfortunately, a lot of these people are hidden because they work through a lot of black South Africans and a lot of black Africans in this country, so that when you see the crimes being perpetuated, you assume that it's black people. Meanwhile, there are South Americans, North Americans, Europeans, East and Western Asians, some people from the Middle East that are peddling some of these crimes, but they have these fronts of these black South Africans who normally we don't speak about, and then a lot of maybe Nigerian, Ghanaian, Congolese, Zimbabwean, and other foreigners in this country that are pushing these things for them. The reason we isolate and ring fence for a deeper discussion is because, number one, or rather most importantly, the masses of this country are black Africans, 80%. These people live in informal settlements. We call them squatter camps. And a lot of them live in the townships, which were largely created or are the legacy of the apartheid regime. These people mostly only see black foreigners outside of the spaza shop owners. The people that do their hair, the people that help them build back rooms, the people that they are competing for jobs, the people selling fruits and vegetables, etc., are black people. So when you have to do a poll, when you have to have a discussion, it will only be that the majority of people will speak about black foreigners and how it's black foreigners that need to get out. Most black people do not live in the suburbs, so they do not see a lot of these white and Asian foreigners, unlike the minority of black people who live in the suburbs, who maybe some of them will speak out, but their voices are so small that it gets drowned out by the masses who mostly see black Africans. And that is why when we have the conversation, unfortunately, we focus on the masses of black foreigners that are here. However, it is fundamentally important that we do make time and space and energy to discuss non-black, non-African foreigners that are in South Africa and figure out how many of them are here legally and have gone through the right channels, how many of them are here illegally, how many of them are involved in crime. Of course, many South Africans speak about 1652, even though that was the Dutch settlers. Before that, we had the Portuguese. Way before that, we have had many settlers in this country who were not here, who did not come here per invitation. So a lot of South Africans, black South Africans in particular, always reference 1652 with the Dutch settlers, Abo Jan van Riebeeck. But way before that, obviously, there were other Portuguese, Bartholomew Diaz and the likes, Vasco da Gama, who came through before that. But as I said earlier when I was discussing history, that a lot of the laws we have today, a lot of the nation states, a lot of the borders are colonial inheritances. And if black Africans want to go back and say all those white people are also foreigners and illegal foreigners because they were never invited here, you're going to have to sit down and make that decision. And then black Africans need to decide, if they make that decision, how far back do you want to go? How far back do you want to go to say this becomes a citizen, this is not a citizen? Because if you're going to do that, please understand there's going to be a retaliation from the rest of the world as well. As it currently stands, when the colonial systems and borders were enacted, everyone who was in that nation at that point moving forward became a citizen. It's the reason why so many white people, Indian people, Chinese people in South Africa and on the rest of the continent identify with whatever country they were born into. Because they will tell you, my family's been here for 10 years, 20 years, for 6 generations, for 3 generations. So if we're going to want to change that, we're going to have this discussion. But as I said, it's going to be fundamentally important that a lot of us have this conversation on non-black, non-African foreigners, legal and illegal, and how we need to deal about or around them moving forward. Number 4, of course, leads on to the laws and the immigrations. If we are happy to host illegal foreigners, now this is a message to a lot of the Zimbabweans in South Africa who maybe side with Rutendo, a lot of Zimbabweans, because you must understand, Rutendo in the sit-down spoke about, and look, it triggered some people. He said Zimbabweans need to learn how to properly go through the channels to get refugee status. And he said the Zimbabwean government needs to train and teach people how to get refugee status, which is one of the reasons why there are so many Zimbabweans in my DMs, in the comments, in other spaces who are like, why do you keep asking Rutendo to come and speak on our behalf? I have to ask Hopewell Chinono to get back to me, but it's via DM. I've never spoken to him directly via text, and I'm hoping at some point someone will get him to speak to me. I'm hoping to get other Zimbabweans with an alternative voice to Rutendo, because you need to understand, Rutendo is in the business of marketing Zimbabwe as a good destination. He is in the business of trying to remove the economic sanctions from Zimbabwe because he wants Zimbabwe to thrive. Now, in that, many of us could argue that, but some of this sounds like propaganda, and it might be. But that propaganda is because Rutendo wants Zimbabwe to win. Now, other people are saying, but this is rubbish. Why would you defend this government and then at the same time want people to get refugee status? I want to highlight this. If we as South Africans are happy to host illegal foreigners, Zimbabwean, Mozambican, Nigerian, from parts of Europe, etc., we will then need to stop respecting other laws as well. The whole concepts that we have currently, yes, it's colonial borders. Yes, it's colonial immigration laws. But it's the laws most of us have found ourselves being complicit to. And if we're going to say it's fine to have illegal foreigners here, it's fine to have the ZEP licenses extended indefinitely. It's fine to just normalize and legalize certain people that shouldn't be here. That means we have to look at certain laws and be like, we don't want to respect them as well. And then we need to have a conversation about how we need to stop respecting immigration laws in other countries, especially African countries. Because an ordinary South African cannot be in Zimbabwe illegally, in Mozambique illegally, in the DRC illegally, in Egypt illegally. We as South Africans who have so many illegal foreigners here cannot go into their countries illegally. It's a crime in that country. And you can't go into that country and dictate to them that you must make me a refugee. You must allow me to be here. You must extend my permit, etc. And we can't move in and out of there as we please. We need to have a conversation around the laws and around immigration. It's fundamentally important as South Africans, it's fundamentally important as Africans for us to understand this concept under the United Nations of a sovereign nation and the laws of that nation and how those laws need to be respected. Because if you're not going to respect South African laws, it doesn't make sense for us to respect laws of whatever country you come from. One of the concepts that has come out, I know Ike Khumalo has spoken about it, I know other people have spoken about it, I think Operation Tutula as well. We didn't speak much, or they didn't speak much about Operation Tutula. They didn't speak much about Nhlanhla Lux, who was the face of Operation Tutula before he left. We didn't speak much about Julius Malema and his stance on open borders and the EFF. But one of the things that has come up, Why do illegal foreigners commit crimes? It's been raised by so many people. And why do they commit the most atrocious of crimes? I think Ike Khumalo mentioned the decapitating, cutting someone's head off. Why are some of these crazy crimes being done by foreigners and illegal foreigners? My answer is simple. Illegal foreigners commit crimes for the exact same reasons that South Africans commit crimes. Why do South Africans commit crimes generally? When you come to a land of milk and honey, like South Africa, if you move from Ngquthu to Johannesburg, if you move from some village in Limpopo to Johannesburg, to Cape Town, and you can't get a job, how then do you survive? On the Penwell Show, one of my other platforms, it was a question that I asked DJ Warwick, where we were speaking about coloureds and coloured people and the gangs and the drugs. And I referenced Andre 3000, 16, song with Rick Ross, where he was speaking about if you're telling young men to stop committing crimes, what then must they do to get by? Gayton McKenzie, the leader of the Patriotic Alliance, has raised something similar. And he said, look, back in the day, the criminals, the thugs, the leaders of the gangs were alphas. Because alphas can't take directive from a boss and a madam. If you're coming into a country because your country is maybe under war, maybe you're poor in your country and you're coming into another country and you're trying to get a job and you're not getting it. You're trying to start a small business. It's not working out. You're trying to start something. People are coming to burn that place. They're coming to steal from you. They're calling you a kwerekwere, a krikamba, a whatever, and they're telling you to go back home. But you're hungry. What do you then do? You lean to crime. That's why so many South Africans lean to crime. Of course, there's desperation, and then later on, there's people that graduate to greed and selfishness, unfortunately. In my opinion, the most horrific crimes, chopping off of heads, mutilation of bodies, selling certain private parts and other organs. These crimes are committed by the most fucked up human beings psychologically. Now, if you've never dealt with great adversity in your life, you wouldn't understand. And again, this isn't just a foreigner or illegal foreigner issue, but please understand, a lot of these illegal foreigners come from war-torn countries where they've seen people being killed, gunned down, women being raped, children being raped, trafficked. So they are mentally fucked up. Some of them, when they have to move from the DRC to South Africa, if you listen to their story of the traveling via foot, via bus, hitchhiking off a truck, sleeping under a bridge, having to dig in a dustbin just to eat, that'll affect your state of mind. So by the time you get to another country and you can't make money in a more decent or legal way, you're so fucked up that when you have to go and hijack someone, you probably think this person will retaliate, so let me kill him and I'm going to butcher him. Compared to what I've seen, Idris Elba's got an amazing movie on Netflix called Beasts of No Nation. Please go check that out. So the most horrific crimes are committed by the most fucked up people, regardless of who they are, who have dealt with the greatest adversities in their lives. These may be foreigners, considering where they come from and what it took for them to get there or get here. My point number 6, and why, message to Rutendo, it's a message to so many other people who are like, let us actually help these people, because it's a plea from people like him. Help us. Help us in Zimbabwe to remove the economic sanctions. Help us in Somalia to end the civil war. Help us in Sudan to stop the civil war. Then we will leave your country and we will go back home. Help us. And I've put here point number 6, why foreigners will not go home even once things get better in their home country. At some point, Helen Ziller, who is one of the leaders of the Democratic Alliance, the DA, called certain South Africans economic migrants. And it triggered a lot of black people who were saying, this is racist. You can't tell us in our country that we are economic migrants. Because she was speaking about largely some of the Xhosa people in the Eastern Cape who moved to the Western Cape, Cape Town in particular, to go look for greener pastures. Some of them from the Eastern Cape moved to Gauteng, Johannesburg. There are many Zulu people from villages and townships in KZN. A lot of Sotho people from parts of the Free State. There are Tswanas from the Northwest. There are vendors and Tsongas from Limpopo. There are Zulus and Swatis and Debeles from Mpumalanga who migrate to the major cities, whether it's Mbombela, Johannesburg, Pretoria, Bloemfontein, could be Cape Town, PE, Gqeberha, East London, eMonti, eThekwini, Durban, etc. They move for greener pastures. I was born and bred in Newcastle and KZN, and I'm here in Johannesburg today. It's one of the questions I've asked South Africans, and they get angry every time I raise it. How are we different to a lot of these foreigners that move to a major city to make more money? Their argument is, you're a citizen, you have an ID, you're allowed. And I'm like, but that's a colonial thing. If the provinces had borders around them, look at a place like Lesotho, look at a place like Eswatini, you would move to a greener pasture place like a Johannesburg. And now that I'm here in Johannesburg, someone tells me, bruv, Newcastle is actually on the rise. It's going up. Move back home. You don't need to be in Johannesburg anymore. Why would I not go back? So the reasons a lot of foreigners, illegal foreigners as well, will never go back to their home countries is because some of them have children here now. Whether they have children with people from other nations or they have children with South Africans. And their children find themselves at home here and they are citizens here. A lot of their friends, their core friendship circle is now here. Their livelihood is here. Even if Zimbabwe tomorrow becomes a Dubai, they will never go back because their children, their friends, their livelihood is here. And generally for a lot of people in the SADC region, for a lot of people in the rest of Africa, there is no place that offers a greater overall experience like parts of South Africa. You can travel the entire world. This is a message to South Africans. You can travel the entire world, Europe, Asia, North and South America, Australasia, the Middle East. Then you will come back and you will visit Cape Town. You will visit the Wild Coast. You'll go and visit the coast on the eastern side of South Africa, places like Ballito, Lelusha, etc. You will see the mountains of the Drakensberg, uKahlamba. You will see some of the scenery in places like Mpumalanga. You will visit some of the game farms, Limpopo in the northwest. And you will live in parts of Johannesburg, Sandton, Sandhurst, Morningside, places in Pretoria like Waterkloof. And you realize that we have some of the most beautiful spaces and places and tourist attractions and weather and human beings in the world. There are legal, wealthy foreigners that come to this country and never leave. Because this place is beautiful. This place is amazing. This place is great value for money. And for a lot of foreigners, even if you were to help them fix their home nations, they will never leave. And that becomes a conversation that we'll need to have as well. Ike Khumalo did say, for South Africans in particular, you cannot go to another nation that has mini towns of South Africans. Foreigners in South Africa have taken over places like Yeoville, next door to Houghton, which is a top suburb. Places like Hillbrow, which used to be uppity back in the day near the Joburg CBD. Places like Sunnyside in Pretoria, which is also in the CBD. South Africans do not have neighborhoods in other African cities. For obvious reasons, of course, because South Africa is like the jewel of Africa. We don't have South African neighborhoods where illegal South Africans live and trade. And these are very important conversations that we need to continue having. My point number 7 is the elephant in the room and some accountability. We touched on it in the debate and the discussion, but I want to re-raise it. The elephant in the room is white people. And the economies, of course, they've built. And they've built them, of course, of exploitation, forced labor, a lot of mass murder. Black South Africans, when we're sitting and we're discussing immigration, foreigners, legal and illegal, black Africans and black African foreigners in particular, black South Africans normally boast a thriving South Africa that was actually built by white people, white colonizers. The British, the Dutch, the French, the German, the Dutch, French, and German eventually became the Afrikaners. They became a mixed breed. The jobs that black South Africans are competing for are normally in white businesses. Even the spaza shops that black South Africans wish they could take back from the Pakistanis, Somalians, Ethiopians, those spaza shops are just mere distributors for white farmers, big commercial white farmers, white manufacturers, and white wholesalers. Black South Africans in South Africa do not buy from black South Africans. Black South Africans do not work for black South Africans. Black South Africans vote for a black ANC and a black EFF. Black South Africans do not even have sovereign townships and squatter camps. Why am I raising this? I'm raising this because one of the conversations that has been raised before is if you do a like on like of black South Africans versus black Africans in other African countries, black South Africans are not much better. So when black South Africans fight other black Africans to be in this country of South Africa, it's because they are saying, leave our white people and our white economy and our white spaces alone. We want to be the only people that work for white people. We want to be the only people that white people choose. We want to be the only people that have a thriving economy built by white colonizers. And that becomes a very sensitive topic that we need to speak about. Because if black South Africans were to buy from black South Africans, work for black South Africans, vote for political parties that prioritize black South Africans, they wouldn't need to worry about foreigners coming here because those foreigners would only work for the white businesses or some of the Asian businesses. And those businesses would be minority businesses because the black South African businesses would be the majority and they would prioritize black South Africans. Religious leaders in this country, the churches, Shembe, ZCC and others, traditional leaders, Misuzulu of the Zulus, you've got people like Utalinjebo and Amaxhosa and other Xhosa royalty. You've got other kings as well. I think we have between 8 and 13 recognized monarchs. Our political leaders, of course, the ANC, EFF. Today we've got Action SA, we've got the Patriotic Alliance, we've got ATM, we've got the IFP. Sadly, the PAC is much smaller. We've got the UDM and others. We've got business leaders, black business leaders in this country. We're speaking about the elephant in the room, white people, and the fact that black South Africans prioritize the white people that have built this white infrastructure and these white systems, which seem to be better than the white people that people like Robert Mugabe chased away from Zimbabwe. And the white people, the Belgians who took over the DRC. And the white people in Nigeria, who Nigerians also seem to take some of the economy back. And we seem to be competing to want to be under this white rule instead of being under black rule. And a lot of these black leaders have failed to create spaces and systems for black South Africans to thrive. Many of the white business owners hire illegal foreigners. And part of this elephant in the room and the accountability is that a lot of illegal foreigners in this country are here because of white businesses and sometimes Asian businesses. They hire illegal foreigners. Why? They hire illegal foreigners because they can underpay them according to labor laws. They don't have to abide by labor laws. They don't have to pay the minimum wage, and they can exploit them and make sure that they even work longer hours than they're supposed to. The reality for people that don't know is that slave labor runs the world, and slave labor has built all first world economies. Any first world economy and empire that has been built, you can look at the United States of America, where they first almost wiped out the natives there, and then they imported Africans as slaves. You can look at parts of Europe where they were enslaving each other. And then later on, when they had exhausted each other, they started going to colonize other nations to go and exploit and enslave those people. You can look at Asia, where the Indians, to this day, enslave themselves. You look at the Chinese, especially under Mao, who enslaved themselves. We speak about sweatshops and counterfeit goods. Slave labor has built the world and first economies. South Africa almost became a first economy because of our commodities here, the diamond rush, the gold rush, and all the other commodities as well. And South Africa, as one of the best economies on the African continent, was also built off slave labor. A lot of the black Africans in South Africa were enslaved. Some of the white landlords and miners and manufacturers brought in slaves from other parts of Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Malawi, etc. to come and mine. To this day, this is my conspiracy theory. Some of the Zamazamas, illegal miners we have in South Africa, are working for certain white people in the shadows. Some of these white people own mines, and sometimes when it's not profitable to mine legally because there's so much compliance and so many legalities and costs, they will pay certain people to go and carry on mining to sell things on the black market. When a lot of the black Africans refused to start working for some of these white people, the white people brought in other foreigners. They brought in Indians from India into KZN to go and work the sugarcane plantations. That's why Durban has got the largest concentration of Indians outside of India. More than even places like London, where a lot of Indians were shipped as well. So the Indians that are in KZN, in Durban, and that have spread across KZN and parts of South Africa were brought in as slaves to build a sugarcane industry. If you look in the Western Cape, today we speak about Cape Malays. There were Malaysian people that were brought in as slave labor when the black indigenous people there, whether it is the Khoi and the San, or whether it's the Xhosa people there, that refused to work. So they said, if you won't, we will bring in other slaves to come and work and build this country. Not much has changed today. As black people have received political liberation and debatable economic liberation, white people have said we cannot afford these minimum wages and we don't want to abide by this labor law. So what we'll do when you run a restaurant is we'll hire Zimbabweans, Malawians, Mozambicans, Sutus, Swatis, Tswanas. Because they don't have paperwork, we can pay them whatever we want and we can overwork them. We can exploit them so that my restaurant makes money, so that my business makes money. It's the reason why certain foundations, in my opinion, like the Helen Suzman Foundation, is hell-bent on defending illegal foreigners in this country, calling it a human rights violation to get rid of them. It is because a lot of the people that fund foundations such as those, a lot of people that fund some of your politicians, they are businesses, they are mines, they are factories, they are retail stores, they are restaurants. They are homes, the people that work for them in their gardens, in their kitchens, the people watching their kids are illegal foreigners. And they do not want these people gone because they understand that the world is built of slave labor and illegal foreigners. What is sad, speaking about white people and accountability of white people in this country, is that a lot of black people need to look in the mirror. A lot of black people buy from these puzzle shops I mentioned. A lot of black South Africans, when they are looking for a nanny, they cannot afford black South Africans. They get people from Eswatini, from Lesotho because they are cheaper and they exploit them. When they want to build a house, when they want to extend and build rooms at the back, they bring in Mozambicans, Malawians, maybe some Zambians as well. There are people who want to thrive in this country, black, white, colored, Indian, who need illegal foreigners because it's what helps them maximize profits for themselves. But realistically, hiring an illegal foreigner is a crime. And every single white person, I've addressed black people, I'm addressing Indians, I'm addressing coloreds, but for white people in particular, who think that they are absolved from this conversation, every single white person in South Africa who has hired a cleaner, a gardener, who is not South African and who cannot produce paperwork, their passport, their work permit, of which they actually shouldn't have a work permit because you need to have a scarce skill to be here. As soon as you hire them, white person, you are committing a crime. You are complicit in a crime and you are part of the reason why we have an illegal foreigner situation here. I've used this example before in the past. If you are constantly going to be littering, when you have a rat infestation, a cockroach infestation, you are to blame because you do not keep this place clean. Similarly, every time you stop at a traffic light, at a stop sign, and there's a beggar there, dirty beggar, and you give them food and you give them money, you are enabling them to stay there because they benefit something. And if tomorrow one of these beggars smashes your window because they are desperate, if one of them hijacks your car, if one of them violates you, you become complicit in that act because you are the one enabling that type of behavior. Instead of saying, I will stop giving this beggar money and food so that they can go away and get real help, get a grant, and if they are here illegally or undocumented, go fix that or go back to your home country. Hiring an illegal foreigner is a crime. Underpaying per the labor laws in South Africa for all white business owners is a crime. One of the issues we have in this country, speaking about foreigners, is that the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, which is, last I checked, the largest stock exchange on the African continent, it's between 40% to 52% foreign owned. Our own economy in South Africa is largely owned by non-South Africans. Never mind white people in South Africa. Never mind white monopoly capital. It is majority owned by foreigners outside of this country, which again goes back to the elephant in the room of foreigners. White people, Americans, Europeans. Goes back to what I'm saying about accountability. Black people are fighting other black Africans because they want to be the chosen black people to work for white companies. And if you look at the mainstream economy, for white foreign-owned businesses that run the economy of South Africa. Number 8, Who are the real decision makers in South Africa? A lot of times we feel our politicians are the decision makers, but it has come to fore that, to be fully honest, our politicians are puppets. It's not unique to South Africa. It's not unique to South Africa. It's prevalent in the entire African continent, or on the entire African continent. It's prevalent in Europe. It's prevalent in the Americas, in Asia. Politicians are puppets. They are puppets of the people that run the economies. Of course, when you speak communism, this is why a lot of capitalists fear communism. As soon as a Xi Jinping under communist China, as soon as a Vladimir Putin under Russia, and before him, people like Stalin under the Soviet Union, people like Benito Mussolini, as soon as they take over power under communism, they own the economy as well. Some of the utterings that people like Julius Malema under the EFF speak about, it were the utterings of the ANC at some point, Abo Krisani and the like, under the South African Communist Party back in the day, to say we want to nationalize everything, and it cannot be that the private sector gets to dictate who's going to get electricity and who's not. And that's why today people argue that Cyril Ramaphosa and the ANC have been sent by the private sector to say, go and destroy state-owned enterprises and then privatize them. Recently in Durban, Pier 2, big port, the Durban port is the largest port on the African continent, has been put under a joint venture with a Filipino company run by an amazing, I think it's Razon, the family, third generation family, which is the biggest private harbor and ports owner in the world. The Lighty today worth over $8 billion US. This was under Transnet, a state-owned company. Our railway system has been destroyed, and Cyril Ramaphosa is in conversation with his other business partners at Glencore to see how they can privatize our railway system. They are privatizing parts of this country for the private sector, who are the real decision makers. The people that supply Eskom, the people that supply Transnet, the people that used to supply South African Airways, Pravin Gordhan has sold it now. The people that used to supply Denel, it's been sold now. The people that used to supply ISCO, the apartheid government built ISCO, they built Armsco, they built so many state-owned enterprises like Eskom. ISCO has been sold to ArcelorMittal, today private. Under a communist regime, the government gets to own. Unfortunately, our government, the ANC government, has not proven to be capable of running our healthcare, our education. And most people that can afford it go private. Private health, private schooling, neighborhoods that have private security, including your voted politicians that are meant to be serving you. People like Robert Mugabe, people like Jacob Zuma, they go to places like Russia or China to go and get medical assistance, and they do not believe in their own systems that they're meant to be overlooking. Who decides on a piece of land? This piece of land of South Africa. We'd like to think it's our politicians. We speak to them, but our politicians report to the United Kingdom. That's why every single president, from Nelson Mandela to Thabo Mbeki to Jacob Zuma, Kgalema Motlanthe, Cyril Ramaphosa, have traveled out of their kingdom and comfort zone to go and bow down. It used to be to Queen Elizabeth, today it's to King Charles. Chief Albert Luthuli, who was the leader of the ANC, when he had issues and wanted liberation for black people, went to go and ask the monarch in the United Kingdom and Britain to intervene. So who exactly owns South Africa? Moeletsi Mbeki, an old-timer, the brother of Thabo Mbeki, has gone to say recently that South Africa is still a British colony and we work to serve the British and the Commonwealth. So black South Africans might think they're fighting, they might think their politicians make those decisions. We want to remove the borders, we want one Africa, we want these people to go back to their homes. But who actually makes the decisions in this country? Because the Minister of Home Affairs, Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, is not doing what he's meant to be doing. Some of your political leaders, Gayton McKenzie, Herman Mashaba, they are campaigning to say, put me in power, I will ensure. But do they really have power? Do they really make the decisions? And who is funding them? The DA, John Steenhuisen, they want South Africans to side with America against Russia. Who are they serving? Whose agenda do they serve? Why are they not prioritizing South Africa? Why are they not prioritizing getting rid of drugs and the gangs in the Cape Flats? Who are the real decision makers in South Africa? We're constantly begging the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, constantly taking loans from the IMF, and the World Bank, etc., constantly owing money to them. A big chunk of the money we raise in tax goes to paying off interest on the debts that we owe. Once we figure out who are the real decision makers in this country, we'll figure out who are the right people to speak to who are the right people to hold accountable if we believe as South Africans that this is sovereign terrain and we want certain people to be removed from this terrain. Point number 9. On the 17th of July, 2023, I wrote a tweet, and I'd like to read it. South Africa does not belong to South Africans, especially black Africans. The land is controlled by the big local and global companies that are willing to kill or psychologically program others to preserve their hold over the minerals, prime farmland, great tourist real estate, and the most beautiful residential areas. The locals in South Africa are merely allowed to be tenants in South Africa. I wrote a note. Land fundamentally belongs to no one, but the access, the usage, and the exploitation can be controlled by someone. Going back to who are the real decision makers, a lot of wealthy people that believe in privatization, they believe in the rule of law and capitalism. They love quoting the Constitution. The whole concept of having a title deed, the concept of private property, which Cyril Ramaphosa has said in front of a white audience that we will defend you per the Constitution. We will make sure that no one expropriates your land unfairly. Who does South Africa belong to? Land the world over. The world over is a natural resource. To people who are believers, they say the world belongs to God. Nature is a God-given right. Human beings at some point, with supposed cognitive advance that they have over animals, decided to start creating borders. Human beings decided to convince everyone else of the concept of sovereign nations and sovereign states. Human beings, through psychological tools like a national anthem, psychological tools like a flag, psychological tools like a certain language or official languages, certain cultures, they decided to convince you psychologically that this is your nation, this is your land, you must fight and die for it. You must fight for your country. Go to war and kill other people who are doing the same for their piece of land. And today people have bought into that concept, and to this day South Africans, black South Africans, believe South Africa is their land. Africans lived in Africa. Natural resource. Of course, we had natural boundaries. I said this in my first point. If you were Xhosa, you would not encroach on Zulu land. If you were Umthethwa, you wouldn't encroach on Nxumalo land. You wouldn't encroach on Zulu land unless you've asked for permission and you've been given a right. Something that so many South Africans, Ike Khumalo has said as well, that we have been very welcoming and accommodating of people that were not indigenous to here. You can be Shona Ndebele. We know largely where your people came from. You can be Tswana. We know where your people came from. You are Zulu. We know where your people came from. And now you are coming into the Western Cape, into the Free State, into the Northwest. Ask. Let us allow you to come here and work and settle freely without feeling like a burden. But you guys are not following this. And unfortunately, the laws we quote today are colonial laws. I realized at some point, it was a light bulb moment. Black South Africans hated the concept of apartheid under Hendrik Verwoerd. Apartheid went and split this country into Bantustans and gave a big bulk of the land to a minority of white people. To this day, black South Africans say we want our land back because a lot of them were legally, laws legally shafted off the land by the apartheid government. They say we want our land back. Under apartheid, we did not want to recognize apartheid, and we wanted the Bantustans abolished. Bantustans could have been formalized more aggressively than we had them now. And there would have been borders around KwaZulu. There would have been borders around the Eastern Cape. There would have been borders around certain parts of Mpumalanga, etc. And today, if a Zulu man is found in the Eastern Cape, they would be called an illegal foreigner if they didn't get permission. A Venda man would be called an illegal foreigner if he found himself in the Free State without permission. The concept of borders, the concept of sovereign nations and states is apartheid. It is segregation. Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Namibia, Botswana, Eswatini, Lesotho. That is apartheid. Those are Bantustans. The colonizers built stronger systems, unlike the apartheid government, to say we will create physical borders and we will make sure there are flags and anthems. If the apartheid government had had more time and had better tact, like the British and the French on the African continent, they would have made sure that KwaZulu has its own flag, its own anthem, had its own government. Mangope in Bophuthatswana, your own language, your own culture, your own national sports team that you're proud for, your own military. And you're like, I will fight and die for my country of KwaZulu, my country of the Western Cape. The concept of sovereign nations under the United Nations is apartheid and segregation. But you don't see it as such. And if as a black South African you think apartheid and segregation were wrong and Batustans were wrong, the question becomes, why are you happy to agree with apartheid and segregation called borders and sovereign nations and flags and land? Again, these are some of the more complex and philosophical conversations we need to have. But land does not belong to anyone. It is nature. That's why a chimpanzee and a bird and a lion, they don't need a visa. They don't need a passport to move from one place to another. However, human beings have created borders. They've created these spaces and we've bought into them. If you, as a black South African, this is particularly to black South Africans, if you want to own a piece of land, I mentioned this in the history, you need to conquer other people. You need to conquer Zimbabweans, Nigerians, Malawians, Mozambicans in South Africa and force them into another piece of land and make sure that when they come here, there are dire consequences. If you want white monopoly capital and you want white foreigners, white people that are here, settlers, colonial settlers to leave, you need to conquer them. Whether by killing, which a lot of them did. We can go to Genghis Khan and the Mongolian Empire. We can go to people like Julius Caesar. We can go to the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, etc. We can speak about Israel and Palestine and the conflict there. We can speak about Russia and Ukraine. We can speak about the United States of America that has got military bases everywhere. Fighting. Today, the people of Lesotho say that a part of South Africa, part of Free State going up to Gauteng belongs to Lesotho. Are they willing to conquer physically through a military and killing and mass murder? Or are you willing to use psychological means and convince certain people that we have built a legal system that is better than this one? We now no longer use the South African ID. We've come up with our own. It could be a virtual ID. And if you're not on this virtual ID, you do not belong on this piece of land. And convince people to bow under a flag. Convince people to sing a anthem which says we are the people of Facebook. We are the people of Google. Are you a citizen? Do you have your virtual citizenship of TikTok? Can you sing the anthem which binds us together? It's the reason why the concept of sports team is so powerful. You will never walk alone. Liverpool, Manchester United. People will fight physically over a derby between Orlando Pirates and Kaizer Chiefs under one badge, a symbol, a color. Do you have the ability to do that as black South Africans and define for yourself who is a citizen? Can you control the mineral resources, the tourist destinations and real estate? We saw now the Sheikh in the Eastern Cape coming to get a game farm, getting to extend a runway for himself. You claim this is a sovereign nation. He did it. Who decides whether he is legal or illegal? Some of the business people that come here, the Russians, the Germans, the Americans, black South Africans get happy when you set up a Toyota plant in Uitenhage, when you set up a Ford plant in Pretoria, because they're happy to bow under and say, we will get jobs at least. Let these guys come because at least we get jobs. These Zimbabweans and Nigerians are not coming to bring jobs. They're coming to take jobs and take our money. That means you are inferior to certain people, but you claim to be superior to others. And you have never conquered anyone else. But you're happy to have these conversations and to fight and tweet and make noise. Borders are fancy apartheid, and we have bought into them. 10. My personal stance and my closing remarks. Last year, when Operation Tutula was trending on social media, and Rutendo Matinyarare accused myself and DJ Sbu of hosting a black Nazi on Ntlantlalax on the Hustlers Corner, he later on apologized, Nhlanhla Lux left Operation Tutula. I made a couple of videos sharing my thoughts on foreigners and illegal foreigners, and I'm speaking here on behalf of Black South Africans, speaking to you on behalf of all South Africans, black, white, etc. I'm speaking to you on behalf of what is deemed the law and the constitution in South Africa, in other African nations, and in the world under the United Nations. But I'm a penalist. I have my own belief system, and my belief system is around good people. And one of the things I said in the videos, which confused a lot of people, was me saying, I don't really care if someone is legal or illegal. I do not control South Africa. I do not control the borders. I do not have a say. What I do have a say is on my own life, on the lives of my loved ones, on the lives of my community. There are good people who are foreign in this country. There are good people who are foreign, who are illegally in this country. They jumped a border. They paid a bribe. They're here now. Good people trying to offer a service, trying to add value. They do hair. They sell phone parts. They help build. They come and do your plumbing. They babysit your kids while you're away. You entrust them with your children. And they offer value and a service. And I value them. And I don't see them as the enemy. Are they committing crimes? Of course. Are they breaking the law? Definitely. Am I complicit by buying from a Pakistani spaza shop? Fuck, of course. But these are good people. There are many bad people in this country who are citizens of South Africa. Black people, white people, coloreds, Indians, who are bad, who commit crimes, who hijack, who sell drugs, who murder, who rape. There are many bad politicians who are involved in corruption, who are the reason why you're in poverty and struggle, who kill other people because they want to make money, who are fronts and ambassadors of other criminals, local and foreign. They are the ones that enable some of this movement, some of this crime that happens here. You guys vote for them. Some of us vote for them and we're complicit. We need to get to a point where we can distinguish between good people and bad people. We need to get to a point where we can move beyond borders and figure out what are your real borders. Where do you draw the line in where you send your children to school, in which neighborhoods you live in which people you bring into your own circle. We do have borders in this country. If you live in Stain City, Waterfall City, if you live in an estate, I touched on it earlier, but black South Africans have not claimed sovereignty around their own townships. Never mind the country. If you had sovereignty over your own township, over your own squatter camp, foreigners would not be allowed to have spaza shops just there. Foreigners would not be allowed to settle there. You would not need to worry about what the government is doing because you would say, in this space, as the taxi industry does, they say no one will have a route here. We claim sovereignty over the routes. There are people that claim sovereignty over certain farmland. You have been unable to claim sovereignty in your own space where you allow an illegal foreigner to come and babysit children in your house, to come and do your garden, to come and do your plumbing, electrical work. You have not claimed sovereignty over your money where you buy from a Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Somalian, Nigerian. You have not claimed sovereignty over yourself, but you're very quick to judge. I believe in good people and bad people. I believe Ike Khumalo is a good person. I believe Rutendo Matinyarare is a good person. That's why I'm happy to sit with them. I believe some of the people at AfriForum who help patrol the borders are good people. I believe they are good politicians, religious leaders, traditional leaders, etc. But there are many bad people, and we have to look deeper than this concept of borders, this concept of what's legal and what's illegal. Slavery was legal. Apartheid was legal. Today, borders are legal, and you guys are happy to abide by them. I'll end here, and I look forward to a lot of your comments, your suggestions. And I hope at some point I'll sit with Ike and Rutendo and sit with other Zimbabweans, other South Africans, sit with Nigerians, Mozambicans, sit with maybe spaza shop owners from Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, sit with Indians from South Africa, Indians that come from India, sit with South Americans, sit with Europeans, and have some of these conversations on immigration and movement. And where do we stand and what direction do we want to move in as human beings on this planet called Earth, on this land that is freely all ours, and where we've become complicit in forcing this divide and conquer that has been created by the elite, who they get to live and move as they wish, and the rest of us end up fighting with each other when we actually serve their agendas and not ours. Pin you all the black pen.